Hello, Miami. This is 305 Sports Now, your home podcast and channel for all things Miami sports related. I am Will, and joining me today is the OG of 305 Sports Now guest, the first ever guest that we've ever had on the show. All right, is Coach Manny Matsakis. All right, Manny Matsakis is a former head coach, former assistant under Coach Bill Snyder, and worked with, all right, a former Texas Tech Raider head coach, the late Mike Leach. Coach Matsakis, how you doing, sir?
I am doing fantastic, Will. Enjoying my time. I've made a little move and up here, actually living in my hometown. So it's crazy living back where you grew up, and I hadn't been there in a few decades, but it's been good though.
All right. Speaking of which, one of the reasons why you moved back is because of your dad. So,
Yeah.
how's your father doing?
Great. It's interesting. He turned 90 last December, and a big thing is, Dad's 90, Mom's 78, and it's one of those things that she's been taking care of him. She's old school Greek family, refuses to put him in a home, one of those things, and
Yeah.
she's there to take care of him. But oftentimes in those situations, well, it's like the caretaker is the one that feels it the most because of the physical just picking him up, and if he falls, things like that. So we decided after I had left, after the season was over with fan-controlled football back in June, we got a house about 3 blocks from my folks. I literally parked my car out there so it's facing my parents' house in case she calls. And yeah, every couple of weeks or so, she may call saying, "Hey, Dad fell down." Instead of calling, ambulance to come get him or the ER. Then I just drive down, help him get up, and spend a half hour just talking football with him. He's an old ball coach himself, so that's how we hang out a lot. And he's actually gotten a lot sharper since our families moved back here. My 10-year-old and he just have conversation after conversation, so it's been strong.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And like we talked about before we started, I think the fact that family's close and nearby has really uplifted his spirits.
Yeah.
So I think that helps out with a lot of the, with what's been going on, but my gosh, man, and he's in his 90s and still,
Yeah.
basically having conversations about football and interacting with his son, with his grandson, your son. I think that's absolutely amazing. So thank you for sharing, with our
Oh, sure.
audience.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Um, you were very close with former head coach Mike Leach. Here in Miami, for a lot of UM fans like myself, we feel like he's the coach that we should have gotten but never had because of the fact that our athletes, fit the air raid system that he implemented, over at Texas Tech under Hal Mumme, learning from Hal Mumme, implementing and making it very popular at Texas Tech. When he was sick and he passed, first things foremost, how did you how was it a shock to you? How did you take it?
Yeah, it was a shock because it wasn't a week or prior that he and I had a conversation, and I didn't. It wasn't much anything in regards to health. Just the typical, hey, it's a late night and about 1 a.m. when we're calling each other and just going through things and just talking about, hey, why'd you move back home? And we're just getting caught up. And no, I just felt it went. He was doing fine, and the only thing in recollection is he was coughing a lot, and way more than I ever had remembered. And I'm thinking, is he okay? Has he got a cold? What's going on? And then I get I'm trying to think. A buddy of mine here, a physician who knows the people down in Mississippi State, he sent me, and this is way before it ever hit the news. Like in today's day and age, it's internet and it rolls, and I'm like, this is like literally 12 hours before anything. And he forwarded me an email that the doc at Mississippi State or one of the physicians associated with them, I don't know who it was, but said, hey, Coach Leach is not doing very well and so forth. I'm like, what? And then I didn't, then the next day you wake up and it's like all over the place. And it was, at first it was just disbelief, and then I just didn't want to talk to anybody. I'll be honest. I mean, it was one of those things that even my wife kept saying, "What's wrong?" And I'm like, "Well, I just need to get away." So I just literally I live near the Ohio River, just went down there and walking and thinking about Mike and, praying for him. And, because at that time we didn't know exactly how soon he would go. And, that was probably that was the hardest part, because you get barrage of text messages. People know that, my early years relationship with him before we got to Texas Tech, and those are great stories my assistant coaches used to love. So I would get these things. I didn't respond for about 2 weeks after that. I just said, let me just leave it. I didn't put anything on Twitter. I just let it be, because I just felt that his family, Sharon and the kids just needed their own space, and they were certainly being invaded by social media and just media, period. So I got it, but it was hard. He's a good friend. That was tough.
Yeah, well, how are you holding up now?
Oh, fine. I mean, after a while, you start to think about it, and then, then it was like the other day, Greg McMacken, who the three of us were the guys that first got at Texas Tech, then he passed away. I'm like, geez Louise, So it's like Greg used to coach at Miami,
Okay.
all right, and he was there with Dennis Erickson, his
Mm,
defensive coordinator there, and I think he had Warren Sapp in there. That was
yeah.
those days, right? And Greg was another really good guy, because the first three guys that got on campus in Lubbock was Greg, myself, and Mike, and we were like the three amigos there to get this thing going. And then I see he goes, and I'm like, geez. And then I'm on the phone with Dave Aranda, who was worked with us in Lubbock, and it was, that was a little different because he was older, right? He was in his late 70s, so Mike and I are similar in age. I think he's like a year older than me, but that it's just the mortality of it. Like, hey, are you, even if you think you're taking care of yourself, or you just don't know. And it's like, hey, it made me rethink some things, maybe think that what I was doing coming back home and turning down, a variety of coaching jobs and all that it was the right thing to do. And just made me start thinking about my legacy. What can I create from being where I am to help coaches, help football, because that's always been my drive internally, so.
Um, in regards to the media and Coach Leach's passing, I will say this: it was relatively positive.
Oh yeah.
The coverage that was given to him, as far as tributes go, ESPN
Oh
spoke
yeah.
very well about him. I think even one of the anchors might even cried.
Mm-hmm.
When one of the college football anchors may have even cried. I know you said you basically went off and, to basically, which I understand, you guys were very tight knit and you decided to, to cope with it your own way, to grieve your own way. But if you did see some of the coverage in particular, how did it make you feel as basically working with him?
Mm-hmm.
The fact that there was such a
Yeah,
positive reaction, and not just in Mississippi or even Texas, people in Miami, that I'm friends with on social media, they posted tributes to him because, like I said,
sure.
he's like the coach that we wanted but never got.
Yeah, and I can give you a quick story on that in a
Okay.
second. But to answer your question, it's like, yeah, I saw the SEC network do some things, and Paul Feinbaum. That was the only thing I really watched, and then, but what struck me was the guy that I knew so well. One, I guess it didn't surprise me, but it did surprise me the scope of people all over, not just around the country, but there are people there. I had a guy in England that had reached back out to me that used to come down and watch practice at Texas Tech, and Mike actually years later he would go to England. He'd go up there and have beers with this guy, sit in the bar with his with one of our former assistants, Dennis Simmons, who's now out at Southern Cal, and there, he had pictures on there, and then there's another guy, Joe Clements, who's down in Key West, and on Facebook I saw him having photos of him and Mike, and that was Mike's best friend in Key West, why he actually bought a house. So it's like, as I see that, everything from that to the restaurateur that he helped out in Starkville, right? I mean, she
Hmm.
was struggling, and he gave her some money and to help her business go. It's like, it didn't matter across the board. It just seemed his reach because of his how genuine he was, and a lot of people used to think, oh, he's quirky. Well,
Mhm.
Mike was just he was in the moment, and he had a very active mind, right? So it's like I think that made so many people, it drew their defenses down. Hey, he's a regular dude,
Yeah.
and he really cared about people, and it didn't matter. You didn't have to be the most impressive guy in the world, from a media standpoint, because he had friends from, the lady that served him coffee to Donald Trump. I mean, you name it, and not that one's any better than the other, but my
Yeah.
goodness, it's like President Trump, which segues into that. He's the one. Well, he wasn't the president at the time, but Mike and he were close after Mike had written his book. Somehow they had connected, and when there was one time when the job opened up at Miami, that was Mike's dream job, right? And he's sitting in Key West and doesn't have a job, and I know Donald Trump had called. I'm trying to think of the lady that was the president there at the time in Miami.
Donna
Shalala.
Shalala, trust me,
Shalala.
we remember
Yeah.
her. Not very
Yeah.
fondly, but we
Well,
remember her.
yeah. And she refused to even talk to Mike.
I know,
And he's
unbelievable.
like, listen, he is what you need. And Donald Trump did that, and I thought, wow, because that was always, even a job in Lubbock, he would tell me, if we could go anywhere, I'd want to coach the Miami Hurricanes. Even there, once we got there, that was a dream job of his, and why we always, every spring as a coaching staff, it was legendary. We would always go for about 10 days, leave the wives, family, take a plane into Miami, visit with the Dolphins for a day, get convertibles, go to Key West for the rest of the time, and just have our staff retreat. Every year we would do that at the end of recruiting in May. And I don't know, he always loved that place and just thought I could really, I don't know, he just felt it was like the perfect place for him. Yeah, it just never worked out.
No, I didn't, and I agree. I think the system was perfect. The administration back then, I'll be very frank with you. I mean, I have a platform to say it. I'm also a Kane alum. Wasn't very interested in athletics.
Mm.
As today's administration under Julio Frank, that they really are investing in the program and are trying to get the best guys possible to become a winning football team. Um, just like in basketball. In basketball, to her credit, she did hire Jim Larrañaga. The basketball team is doing extremely well, but now, due to administrative changes, there's more investment in the basketball team as well. So, I think under maybe a different circumstance, Coach Leach would have been the head coach of the Miami Hurricanes, but unfortunately,
Mm.
it wasn't meant to be. And again, we were robbed of what could have been probably the highest scoring offense, in the
Yeah.
history of the University of Miami because of the air raid. And actually, that season, Miami, when he was trying to be the head coach of the Canes, Miami had a pretty decent recruiting class of offensive players. So that would have been quite quite uh quite entertaining, per se,
Oh, well, no
as far
question.
as that
Yeah.
goes.
It would have been, and that's what's tough. I mean, you think about it, just the way it all came down. It would have been the perfect storm, because it was like I remember because they hired Al Golden. That's when
Mhm.
it was. And you take a look at and no disrespect to Al, but the opposite of Mike Leach.
Yeah.
He came in jacket and tie. The New Jersey. Here's a
Yeah.
Mike's a cowboy from Cody, Wyoming. I mean, he was totally different, and I just thought it was interesting that they went at that point, and then a year later he goes to Washington State. So that was when he was in exile in Key West when all that was going down.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I was a decent guy, but it just wasn't a right fit philosophically, in
Hmm.
terms
I
of
can see that.
especially on defense.
Hmm.
Philosophically speaking, it wasn't a good fit for the program. Like I said, things happen for a reason, as well. And Manny, thank you so much for sharing those stories about Coach Leach. I
Oh
think
yeah,
that
love him. Yeah.
it gives the audience a perspective on who he was as an individual from somebody who worked with him for a very long time and was actually friends with him as well. So thank you
Mhm.
so much for
Sure.
sharing those stories. They're fantastic. Speaking of fun, okay. I never got to see a game. I'm gonna be very frank with you, but I heard great things about the fan controlled football league that you were involved in terms of coaching.
Hmm.
And you had some personalities in that league as well, guys like Johnny Manziel
Yeah.
and Terrell Owens. What was it like coaching in such a different atmosphere? And what was it like, what was the environment like, in the FCF?
I had never done it before, anything remote. I've never coached indoor footballs, but I just thought, at the time, I was literally sitting at home thinking, okay, what do I want to do? And I didn't, at that point, I wasn't sure what direction I wanted to go. And a buddy of mine, Sean Liotta, called me, and he was one of the originators of this and had been a guy that years before, when I was the offensive coordinator at Wyoming, um, he had reached out to me, and I was able to basically teach him my offenses, and that's how he got going in the system. But he calls me, and we had a conversation about it, and it was the second season of it. And he goes, "Yeah, we're going to be in a hub, and we're in Atlanta, and they put us up at the Marriott there in Buckhead, and then we had, we trained. We had an outdoor training center where it was like a, I don't know, like some type of a soccer facility, and we had 8 teams, and we come in, and in the end, I ended up being in charge of all the quarterbacks. That was my expertise area. So I had the quarterbacks, and then there were a lot of pro coaches there. I mean, almost everybody had coached in the NFL, and some legendary assistant coaches. I mean, guys that coached shoot, Chris Carter and Randy Moss, and who's the other? Oh, Fitzgerald. All the. I mean, that's one buddy of mine was coaching there. Another guy was with the Dallas Cowboys, and Jimmy Johnson had a bunch of Super Bowl rings and all this. So those were a couple of the receiver coaches. So we're just hanging out in Atlanta, and we are coaching 8 different teams, and it was fun because like the fans would control like who was on the team. They had their own draft, live drafts, and then I coached a team called the Knights of Degen. It was like an NFT owned company, right? The company that came in and owned my team. So I had a lot of fan involvement. Just they would reach out to me. It'd be like during the game, and I would be getting text messages from the guy that was doing the media for them, say, "Hey, coach, what do you think? What kind of play you want us to call?" So it was like they were getting involved, and I would give them insight. And so yeah, you're right. We get personalities like Johnny Manziel. You've got, I think we had some Kelly Bryant. Remember, play at Clemson?
Yes.
Was there? I had DeAndre Francois, Florida State. Some really good quarterbacks. And then we made a trade mid-season, and then there's Terrell Owens there, and and I'm like, oh, and he's freakish still. I mean, just
Yeah,
imposing, right?
he's close to 50, and you wouldn't even
Yeah.
think about it. He still looks like he can play.
Well, we had him clocked there in a 4.4. Okay, so he can run.
Wow.
He can
Oh my
still run.
gosh. Wow.
Oh, he's amazing. And yeah, there was a point there at the end, I think, that Tom Brady was trying to get him to come to Tampa. I mean, it was like he
Okay.
was trying to make a comeback with us. But either way, he had his own show going on there and all that. So much stuff that, like, on the weekends, Will, when we would play, I would look over there, and like it was like a who's who. Like, oh, Marshawn Lynch is sitting over there. He's just watching the game, and then you've got guys like what's Michael Irvin come hang out on the weekends at the games, and it was Joe Theismann. I mean, it was, you name him, it was like celebrity fest. Plus other guys that I'd never heard of. They were like DJs, guys like I met Quavo. I don't know if you know. He's like a, what, I think he's a famous DJ,
It
right?
rings a bell. So
Yeah. So I mean, some of your people might know
I'm a
him,
rock
right? I don't
guy,
know.
so
Yeah, me too. I'm rock country. That is not what I
okay.
get into. So, but it was fun because I learned so much down there, being around really good people and coaches, and it just made me think a lot. When I was down there, how can I help kids out? What's the purpose of this? And what's funny, Will, is like every weekend, we weren't on cable, it was streamed, right? So everything was
Yes.
streamed, and we were averaging over 2.5 million viewers every weekend.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
Wow.
it
That's
was
that's
way
great.
more than like the USFL tried to play. They were playing in Birmingham. We had way more than them, and it's like, the fans were engaged. They would get their phone. They would vote for the play that they wanted, and there was a whole app built to it. So it was fun to just see a different side of all this. It was almost like a reality show for 3 months, living in a hotel, getting interviewed, going through the whole process, and just having a great time. Probably the best time I had was at night outside of the Marriott. We'd sit out there with all the coaches, and most of them all smoked cigars, so we'd have everything from Cuban cigars, stuff going in there, and we'd just be sitting out there talking at night and just sharing stories. It was so much fun.
Yeah. Was this like a one-off thing, or are they gonna have multiple seasons?
Well, that was the second season,
Second season, okay.
and now we were initially going to go back. I would have been there by now, but we were initially going to go back around now, and now they got the the XFL playing, and the USFL, and they have launched FCH, fan controlled hoops. That's about to
Okay.
go now, and then I'm hearing things that things are getting pushed back, and you know, there's a like a broadcast company. I can't. They haven't announced it yet, but there's one of those that you can get on your cable that supposedly wants fan controlled to play at a different time of the year, like on Tuesday, Thursday. So I'm just speculating. It could be later in the fall when you've got a dead time, on Tuesday nights or whatever. So they wanted to, because of the large streaming audience they were getting, I believe that they were talked into, hey, let's push it and find our own niche, because XFL is looking like they're getting some legs there, and so is the USFL coming up just afterwards. So should be interesting.
Quick question. As far as the streaming goes, were you independently? Was it independently being streamed as its own company, or did you work with a provider? Let's say, for example, I don't know. Let's say Tubi or YouTube TV or something like
Yeah,
that.
there were various providers. It just
Okay.
wasn't one, because I would see different logos up all over the place. And then we would have like major sponsors like Wendy's, Progressive. I mean, it was like it was sponsored nicely. So they've got, whoever did the marketing there did a heck of a job getting all that together. And but yeah, it was more than one of those streaming networks were engaged in this to get those numbers there.
I'm probably getting ahead of myself here, but since it was so successful the first couple seasons, it was based off Atlanta. Any talks from the ownership about expanding to multiple cities?
They will not. They love the
Okay.
hub concept,
Okay.
and I can see why. One, it's an indoor league. I'm not a fan of hub outdoor like USFL did last year. I thought that was horrendous, because you got the Pittsburgh Maulers and they're never in Pittsburgh, right? It's like, what are you doing? You're the Maulers, but every game's played in Birmingham, Alabama. That made no sense. So it's like, the Birmingham team might get 12,000 fans for their game, and there would be nobody at other games. But
Okay.
they were, I think, one of the networks bought them, so it's owned by whoever owns the USFL. I'm not even sure who does, but it ended up sort of going in that direction. So, but yeah, I don't think they won't leave that, because and the arena they play in is so cool. It's like something out of, it's futuristic. That's all I can say. If you ever like Google sometime just the images of fan control football, you're gonna look at it, it's like, wow, the screens everywhere, the how close the fans are to the players. I mean, like literally onto luxury boxes that sort of go over onto the field. That kind.
Yeah.
I mean, they're right there. And but I thought ingenious idea. It's just different because you're not outside and it's not 11 on 11. So it's a different niche. I think they were able to capture a market of almost like gamer type guys that also love football, and it just blew up. And I think from what I heard, there's no question there's a season 3 coming. I just haven't heard exactly when.
Yeah. One thing about these leagues that are popping up, whether it's the USFL, the XFL, and of course the FCF, is I was listening to Joe Rose, the local radio broadcaster here. I don't know if you know him, but he
No.
used to play for the Miami Dolphins.
Oh,
One of the
nice.
things that he says that what a lot of these leagues are trying to do, since they really can't compete with the NFL because the NFL is such a monster, the creativity that they're using to attract fans is something that the National Football League may like to adopt one day, or
Mhm.
should
Oh
give
yeah.
it a look. So I think the whole idea of, the way it was marketed, the FCF, you'll never get fan control play calling. That's just not in the NFL.
No.
But definitely won't happen. But just some of the streaming aspect of things, the details, just like the XFL has. The XFL has a pretty cool rule that it's, instead of an onside kick, it's
Yeah.
4th and
Fourth and
15.
yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
4th and 15,
Yeah.
which gives your team a chance to actually kind of come back and win. I think those are concepts that the NFL could kind of explore, coming from
Mhm.
some of these lesser known leagues, or some of these lesser leagues, if you want to say lesser,
Yeah.
in particular. So
Yeah. I think football. I mean, I love football. So it's like, to me, I don't. It's not even saturated with the XFL and USFL. In fact, there's only like a week or so overlap between the
yeah,
two leagues this year, and they are different. I think part of it is, one pay XFL is paying a little more than the USFL, so
yeah,
some people are saying, that might be a better talent, and not necessarily. But I mean, I can remember the kid. He was in the USFL, but before that, he was in fan-controlled football. Devontae Turpin, the
okay,
All-Pro for the Cowboys last
yeah,
year, the kick returner. And they kept saying, "Oh, he's from the USFL." I'm like, not really. He started in fan-controlled football, and then he went to the USFL, and then he went there. So there's a place for this, and guys they can get discovered. I know myself, having coached in the Canadian League. That was awesome. I love that experience. It was one of the best coaching experiences in my life. So I can see that there's a niche out there, and it is not even nearly saturated,
yeah.
from what I see.
And you can't sleep on these leagues like Canadian football, or like the
No.
Arena League, or even the XFL, USFL, because one of the greatest defensive players in the history of the Miami Dolphins came from Canadian football, which was Cameron Wake.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah.
Cam Wake is one of the most dominant players to ever put on a Dolphin uniform on defense, and he was a Canadian
Mhm.
football player. So
Yeah.
you can't sleep on these leagues. You never know what
Oh
one team misses, ends up in an FCF, or ends up in the USFL, or ends up in the XFL. Then the NFL looks at them. Oh, we missed on this guy. Let's bring him over. So
yeah.
those are
Well,
things that,
yeah.
yeah,
Think about Warren Moon. I mean, it's a
yeah,
Hall of Famer.
yep,
Okay.
exactly.
In Canada. I mean, that's the thing. So it's and there's a whole lot of that, going on. I've become a student of football outside of just the NFL, and it's interesting, those things going on. And right now you've got they just finished the second year of the European League of American Football. Huge reviews over there. So that's pretty. They just expanded from 8 to 12 teams, and then you got another league that most people don't even know anything about, that pays really well, and it's the Japanese league.
Oh, really?
Oh, huge, huge. Yeah, just Google it. Japan X League football. You're going to be like, oh my, because what happens is they've got a very interesting model where it's almost like, because Japan's an island, right?
Hmm.
And what they do is, think of the way they run football as a little bit like soccer, where teams get relegated or get moved up, that way. So they've got like 8 teams in the top division, and there's a bunch of divisions. But the cool thing is, all those teams are owned by Sony, Fujitsu. They're all corporate teams. So it's like the Fujitsu Frontiers have won the last 4 titles. My buddy's he's the quarterback coach over there, and they pay better than the Canadian League. Not as good as the NFL, but it's a place where remember Denard Robinson, the
Yeah.
quarterback at Michigan? He's
Yes.
over there playing,
Oh,
right?
wow.
Oh, there are guys like, oh, I remember him, and they're over there, and they just get taken care of. So it's interesting how football is just growing, and that's an American football brand. 'Cause it's 11 on 11, so it's pretty interesting there.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest mistakes the NFL made was getting rid of NFL Europe. I think that was something
Yeah,
that benefited a lot of the football players. You
it
know,
did, but it brings up all these other opportunities. So
yeah, well,
in
absolutely.
the end, those guys make so much money. Did they really
Yeah.
care?
We're gonna talk about your podcast later on, the Manny
Sure.
Matsakis show. But one of the more interesting interviews that I heard you speak was when you spoke to the head coach of that. I think it was a league in Amsterdam.
Oh,
There,
actually, it's European League of Football, the one I'd mentioned. He was the
yeah.
head coach of the Vienna Vikings
Yes, thank
in
you. Yes, I'm
Austria.
sorry,
Yeah,
Austria.
yeah,
Forgive me. Forgive me. Yeah,
yeah,
they're averaging like 50 points a game or something like that. So
yeah.
yeah.
They won the title this past year,
Okay.
so
Oh,
they were
that's awesome.
champions.
Congratulations to
Yeah,
the coach.
yeah. He's a
Yeah,
good guy.
yeah, that's fantastic. All right. Well, this is part one. All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is part one of our interview with Coach Manny Matsakis. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned for part two. All right, or you can just click, the video link on your YouTube channel for part two. But if you like what you've heard so far, please do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to 305 Sports Now. We'll see you in a couple minutes. I'm gonna take a quick water break, and we'll be right back.